Have you ever felt the air in a room crackle right before a disaster? That was Paris Fashion Week the moment Meghan Markle stepped into Anna Wintour's kingdom. What followed wasn't just a confrontation. It was a quiet execution caught on camera. And we're about to show you how 5 ice-cold words can destroy an empire. What if the most powerful woman in fashion just declared a silent war on the most divisive woman in royalty? It began not with a bang, not with a public statement, but with a palpable tension in the Parisian air, a static charge of dread that settled over the crowd outside the Balenciaga show. The atmosphere was electric, but this wasn't the thrill of anticipation. It was the heavy, oppressive silence that precedes a storm. Security guards, men who are usually board props in the grand pageantry of Fashion Week, were wired. They weren't relaxed. They were coiled springs, their whispers into earpieces sharp, urgent, and constant. Staff members, the lifeblood of these events, clutched their clipboards with white-knuckled grips, their faces tight masks of shared anxiety. You could see it in their eyes, a look that wasn't about professional stress, but about bracing for a known incoming force. Then, an assistant, rushing past a scrum of photographers, muttered 5 words that hung in the air like a prophecy, a curse spoken under her breath. "She's on her way." There was zero excitement in her voice. No thrill. Only the grim, hollow resignation of someone who has been through this before and knows exactly what is coming. Because when Meghan Markle descends upon an event, it is never a simple arrival. It is a production. It is a strategic occupation of space and attention. An operation meticulously designed to bend the entire universe around her carefully constructed narrative. It is a performance art of control, and everyone who works behind the scenes knows the script by heart. And Paris, the ancient capital of unspoken rules and ironclad hierarchies, a city that does not bend for anyone, was about to witness a masterclass in narrative hijacking. The old world, built on tradition, respect, and a rigid pecking order, was about to collide head-on with the new, a world built on PR, personal branding, and the relentless pursuit of the spotlight. The shockwaves from this collision wouldn't just ripple, they would shatter careers and expose a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. This wasn't going to be a fashion moment, it was going to be a demolition. Then it came. The convoy didn't arrive like that of a guest invited to a prestigious event. It sliced through the Parisian streets like a presidential motorcade, a show of force utterly alien to the understated elegance of Fashion Week. A sleek black limousine, flanked by imposing tinted SUVs on both sides, projected an aura not of celebrity, but of state power. Car doors slammed in a jarring, coordinated rhythm, a sound that cut through the tense silence. And before her foot, clad in a designer shoe, even touched the pavement, a blinding supernova of flashbulbs erupted, a manufactured storm of attention. When she finally emerged, it was a vision in white, a Balenciaga ensemble, meticulously chosen not for its beauty, but for its message, untouchable purity, absolute control. Her chin was lifted at that precise, calculated angle that has become her signature, a silent command for the city itself to bow before her. It was a flawless execution of image craft. But as the photographers swarmed and the chaos intensified, a strange phenomenon occurred. The usual buzz of a celebrity arrival, that chaotic chorus of excited screams and shouts, was completely absent. Instead, there was a cold, analytical silence from the onlookers, the press, the fans. They weren't cheering for her, they were studying her, watching her every move with a detached curiosity, waiting for the performance they knew was coming. This wasn't a fashion icon arriving to pay homage to a designer's genius. This wasn't a duchess attending a cultural event. This was a power player arriving on a foreign shore to claim territory, to dominate the narrative, to make the event about her. And every single person in that crowd, from the seasoned photographer to the young fashion student, could feel the difference. The air wasn't just tense anymore. It was hostile. Inside the venue, the temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Let's be clear, Paris Fashion Week is not Hollywood. It operates on a completely different currency. Not fame, not clicks, but a quiet, earned respect built over decades. It is a world of sharp whispers and coded glances, governed by a hierarchy as rigid and ancient as any monarchy. And at the very center of this universe, enthroned in the front row like a monarch holding court, sat its undisputed queen, Anna Wintour. She was perfectly composed, a still point in a turning world, an unreadable statue behind her signature dark glasses. The moment Meghan's heels clicked against the polished marble floor, a subtle shift occurred in Anna's posture. It was almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to those who had studied her for years, it was a seismic event. Her spine straightened just slightly. It was a sign. She had clocked the situation. She had registered the disturbance in the force. In an instant, the entire room became a study in contained energy. It was no longer a fashion show. It was a Cold War theater. Two powerful storms, two rival queens, were now circling each other in the same confined space, and every other guest, the powerful editors, the genius designers, the A-list celebrities, was suddenly aware that they were trapped in the impending vortex. Meghan's team, a phalanx of assertive aides from Montecito, moved around her not with the deference of guests, but with the aggressive purpose of an invading army, already making adjustments, already issuing instructions, already trying to bend the room to their will. The battle for control had begun before she had even taken her seat. Two queens, one kingdom, and one was about to learn a very hard lesson. The opening shot was fired within minutes, a brazen act of territorial aggression. Meghan's team, ignoring all established protocol, approached the Balenciaga coordinators. Their tone left no room for negotiation. These were not polite suggestions. They were demands. They wanted seating adjustments, a repositioning to a more prominent, more visible spot. Here's the problem. This wasn't a Hollywood premiere where seats are fluid and can be shuffled for the best photo op. This was Paris. The seating chart is a sacred text, a document of immense political and social significance. Finalized weeks in advance, every single placement is a deliberate move in a complex, high-stakes game of power, influence, and prestige. The seat they were demanding belonged to Vogue's long-serving deputy editor, a woman who had earned her place through decades of hard work and dedication, a position of immense respect within the institution of fashion. When the coordinator, a seasoned professional accustomed to dealing with egos, politely but firmly explained that the arrangement was final, Meghan's response, uttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, rippled through the room like a poisoned dart. Maybe she won't mind sharing the spotlight. The effect was instantaneous. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused mid-air. In a world where hierarchy is everything, where respect is earned and not demanded, this was not just a breathtakingly arrogant insult. It was a declaration of war. It was a statement that her celebrity trumped decades of institutional loyalty. Across the room, Anna Wintour slowly, deliberately, lowered her sunglasses, just enough for her eyes to lock directly on Meghan for the first time that night. There was no emotion, no anger, just a cold, analytical gaze that promised a reckoning. The first salvo had been fired, and it had been aimed straight at the heart of Anna's empire, but the assault on protocol didn't stop there. Before the show had even begun, the Sussex operation had already committed another unforgivable sin against the culture of couture. A call had been placed from her team to the Balenciaga production office. The request was so audacious, so profoundly ignorant of the world they were in, that the French organizers who took the call initially thought it was a prank. They wanted the lighting adjusted, not for the runway, not for the priceless collection that represented months of artistic labor. No, they wanted the lighting rig altered for Meghan's specific seat. They were treating a couture show, one of the premier events on the global fashion calendar, as the backdrop for her personal photo shoot, a set to be arranged for her convenience. A senior lighting technician, a veteran of dozens of fashion weeks, was later overheard telling a colleague, his voice dripping with contempt, "This is not a film set. Who in God's name does she think she is?" And that's the core of it, isn't it? This single act exposed the fundamental, unbridgeable disconnect between her world and theirs. In Meghan's world, the individual is the star, and the event, no matter how prestigious, is merely the stage for her performance. In Anna's world, the art is the star, the designer is the genius, and everyone else, no matter how famous, no matter what their title, is a guest who has been invited to bear witness. By demanding her own personal lighting, Meghan wasn't just being a difficult celebrity, she was committing an act of profound, almost holy, disrespect. She was declaring, in no uncertain terms, that her manufactured image was more important than the art she was supposedly there to celebrate. And the institution was taking notes. As the lights finally dimmed and the first model stepped onto the runway, the contrast became painfully, grotesquely clear. The rest of the front row, the seasoned editors, the powerful buyers, the lifelong devotees of fashion who had earned their place in that rarefied air leaned forward, their focus absolute. Their eyes were drinking in every stitch, every silhouette, every detail of the collection. They were there to work, to critique, to appreciate. They were participants in a sacred ritual. Meghan, however, was performing. It was a masterclass in narcissistic theater. Her clapping was just a little too loud, a little too emphatic, drawing attention away from the runway and onto herself. Her whispered asides to her assistant were perfectly timed for her personal videographer, who, breaking all unspoken rules, was strategically positioned to capture her every reaction, her every manufactured emotion. Each tilt of her head, each artful adjustment of her white coat, was a calculated movement for a different audience. An audience watching on a screen thousands of miles away in Montecito, an audience that needed to be fed the narrative of her triumph. An editor seated 2 rows back, a woman who has seen it all, delivered the damning verdict in a barely audible whisper to her colleague. Who is she performing for? The clothes or the internet? The answer was written in every forced smile, every feigned look of awe. The entire, carefully orchestrated event, a culmination of thousands of hours of creative labor, was being systematically hijacked, reduced to B-roll for the Meghan Markle show, and through it all, Anna Wintour sat motionless, her face an unreadable mask behind the dark glasses, filing away every single infraction, every moment of disrespect, in a mental case file that would soon be permanently closed. The verdict was coming. The final model disappeared from the runway, and the room erupted in a wave of polite professional applause. The usual post-show ritual began, guests rising from their seats, turning to their neighbors, beginning the slow, graceful migration toward the designated champagne lounge for air kisses and industry gossip. But Meghan did not follow the flow. She never follows the flow. She moved with an immediacy that bordered on aggression, heading not toward the other guests, but straight for the backstage area. And let's be crystal clear about what that means. This was not the VIP lounge. This was the sanctum sanctorum, the working heart of the entire operation. A space of controlled chaos filled with half-dressed models, frantic dressers, and racks upon racks of priceless, irreplaceable couture. It is a restricted zone, a fortress governed by an ironclad protocol designed to protect 2 things: the privacy of the models and the integrity of the collection. Her advance was a blunt force intrusion into this delicate, high-stress ecosystem, and she wasn't alone. Her team, acting as a human battering ram, cleared a path for her, their American assertiveness a jarring note in the Parisian symphony, and right behind her, her personal videographer, camera rolling, documenting the transgression, capturing content for the next episode of the ongoing drama. This wasn't a guest seeking to congratulate a designer. This was an invasion, a deliberate breach of the one space that is supposed to be sacred, and it was a mistake that would prove to be fatal. A young assistant, she couldn't have been older than 22, saw the approaching entourage and bravely, foolishly, stepped forward to do her job. She held her clipboard like a fragile shield against the oncoming tank. "Madam Markle," she began, her voice trembling just slightly with a mixture of terror and duty. "Would you prefer to wait in the private lounge while we prepare the space?" It was the correct, professional, and polite thing to say. Meghan stopped. She turned her head with a chilling slowness, a movement practiced for maximum dramatic effect. The look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated ice, a look of contempt. "Do I look like someone who waits?" The words were quiet, but they were laced with venom. The young assistant flinched, visibly shaken, as if she had been physically struck. "Of course not," she stammered, trying to recover. "I just meant..." But Meghan was already moving past her, not even bothering to finish the exchange. Her aide, a woman well-versed in her boss's tactics, delivered the final, crushing blow. "She'll be quick. Just step aside." And with that, they were through. The young woman froze, her face instantly paling. Her eyes began to glisten with unshed tears as she stood there, humiliated and utterly powerless, in the middle of the chaos they had created. She had been tasked with upholding the rules, with protecting the sanctity of the backstage area, and she had been run over, dismissed, and broken by a force that believes rules are for other people. In that moment, she wasn't just an intern having a bad day. She was a symbol of the entire institution, of its politeness, its professionalism, its traditions, being bullied into submission by brute force celebrity, and someone was watching. Meanwhile, Anna Wintour was making her discreet, customary exit through a quiet side corridor when the sound reached her. It wasn't the usual, chaotic backstage chatter of a show's end. It was something sharper, more discordant, more aggressive. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her assistant, a young woman attuned to every nuance of her boss's mood, glanced at her, a flicker of concern in her eyes. But Anna's face remained a mask of perfect, impenetrable calm. Without a word, she turned on her heel and began walking toward the commotion. And then came the sound. The distinctive, rhythmic clicking of her heels on the bare concrete floor. It's a sound that, in the fashion world, carries the same weight as a royal fanfare or the cocking of a gun. People recognize that sound. They feel it in their bones before they even see her. It's the sound of approaching power, of a final verdict about to be delivered. As she rounded the corner, she took in the entire ugly scene in a single, sweeping, analytical glance. Meghan and her team crowding the narrow space like a street gang, staff members frozen in discomfort and fear, racks of priceless, delicate garments pushed carelessly aside, and the young intern, standing alone in the middle of it all, her face a mess of humiliation, trying desperately not to cry. Slowly, deliberately, with the gravity of a judge donning a black cap, Anna Wintour removed her sunglasses. The Queen had arrived to survey the damage inflicted upon her kingdom, and she was not pleased. "What's going on here?" Anna's voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it sliced through the tense air like a shard of glass. It carried a weight that filled the entire hallway. The entire corridor went dead silent. The young assistant, trying desperately to smooth things over, stammered, "Oh, Miss Wintour, it's fine. Really." Anna raised a single hand, a gesture of absolute, unquestionable authority that silenced her instantly. "That's not what I asked." Meghan, sensing a dangerous shift in power, turned and deployed her most powerful weapon, the polished, camera-ready smile. "Anna," she began, her voice dripping with practiced charm, "there's just been a small misunderstanding. I was simply..." Anna took one step forward, closing the distance. "You can't bully my staff." 5 words. Not shouted, not delivered with heat or drama. They were spoken with the cold, dispassionate precision of a surgeon's scalpel making the final, fatal incision. They landed in the silent hallway with the force of a physical blow. You could see the shock register on Meghan's face, a flicker of pure, uncomprehending disbelief. The carefully constructed facade didn't just crack, it shattered. For the first time in years, perhaps since she married into royalty, someone had spoken to her not as a duchess, not as a global celebrity, but as a guest who had behaved badly and was being held accountable. And the person who had done it was the one woman in the room whose power, in this kingdom, was more absolute than any royal title. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where sound used to be. Even Meghan's own security detail, men paid to project an aura of intimidating control, looked deeply uncomfortable, caught in a power struggle they had absolutely no authority to intervene in. Meghan stood frozen for a beat, her practiced smile completely gone, her jaw tight with a fury she could not express. Then, with a visible effort that must have taken every ounce of her actress's training, the mask slipped back into place. She forced another smile, a brittle, thin-lipped thing that didn't reach her eyes. "If that's how you want to handle things," she said, her voice tight, "I understand." Anna offered no reply, no nod of acknowledgement, no polite social gesture to smooth things over. She simply stood there, waiting, a silent, immovable object of institutional power, defeated, humiliated, exposed. Meghan turned to her team, her voice a clipped command. "Let's go." It was a full-scale, unconditional retreat. She swept past the designer without a word, offered no goodbyes to the hosts, and headed for the exit like a disgraced general fleeing a lost battle. As the entourage scrambled to follow in her wake, whispers erupted behind them, the sound of sharks sensing blood in the water. In the back of the limousine, as the doors shut with a heavy thud, sealing her in with her stunned and humiliated team, Meghan's first question was not one of anger, or hurt, or even indignation. It was a question of pure, cold strategy. Did anyone film that? She wasn't processing a public insult. She was already assessing the damage to her narrative, already calculating the spin, already planning the countermove. The war was just beginning. 3 days later, the bomb went off. The 30-second clip appeared online, its origin a complete mystery, an anonymous upload, a digital ghost. But the audio was brutally, devastatingly clear. Anna's quiet, firm, authoritative voice. The 5 words of execution. And then, the stunned, incriminating, damning silence that followed. The internet didn't just react, it detonated. Within a matter of hours, the clip was a global phenomenon. A viral wildfire that no PR team on Earth could hope to contain. News networks ran it on a loop. Fashion blogs, with a kind of grim satisfaction, dissected it frame by frame, analyzing every nuance, every pause, every breath. Social media platforms transformed into a massive, global courtroom, with millions of self-appointed jurors all reaching the same verdict. It got so big that cable news brought on so-called AI experts to analyze the voice patterns and waveforms, treating the backstage confrontation with the solemn gravity of a constitutional crisis. And the verdict from this global jury was unanimous and swift. This was no misunderstanding. This was a raw, unfiltered, unforgiving glimpse behind the carefully constructed curtain. It was the moment that confirmed every whisper, every rumor, every suspicion about Meghan's true behavior when the cameras were supposed to be off. The carefully crafted public image of a compassionate, kind humanitarian was obliterated, turned to dust, by 5 simple words and the guilty silence that followed. The digital world finally had its smoking gun, and it was pointed straight at the heart of the Duchess of Montecito. While the internet raged like a California wildfire, Anna Wintour and the institution of Vogue responded with the single most powerful and devastating weapon in their arsenal: absolute deafening silence. There was no statement, no comment from a spokesperson, no carefully worded passive-aggressive Instagram post. Nothing. This was the old guard strategy, a display of power so profound, so unshakable, that it requires no defense. You don't engage with the noise, you simply rise above it, telegraphing to the entire world that the incident and the person at the center of it was too insignificant, too common, to even warrant a response. But don't be fooled. Behind the scenes, a different kind of communication was taking place. A quiet, surgical, and utterly ruthless closing of the ranks. Invitations for Meghan to other shows, invitations that had been pending, were suddenly and quietly rescinded. Proposed brand collaborations were mysteriously postponed indefinitely. Phone calls and emails from her frantic team in Montecito went unanswered, disappearing into a digital black hole. A powerful publicist, overheard at a bar in the Marais, let the secret slip to a friend, not knowing a reporter was sitting one table over. "We were about to invite her to our spring gala," she whispered. Then we heard from Vogue that it wasn't advisable. Think about those 2 words. Not advisable. No direct order was ever given. None was ever needed. In the kingdom of fashion, a quiet word of advice from Vogue is a royal decree. It is a command. And the gates to the kingdom were not just closing. They were being barred, locked, and sealed shut. Predictably, Meghan's team in Montecito scrambled into a full-scale PR counteroffensive. It was damage control 101, straight out of the Hollywood crisis playbook. Suddenly, a flurry of perfectly timed paparazzi photos appeared, flooding the celebrity news sites. There was Meghan, smiling serenely at a local charity event. There was Meghan, crouching down to hug small, photogenic children. There was Meghan, looking pensive and focused on her vital humanitarian work. The captions accompanying these photos were a masterclass in spin, a desperate attempt to paint her as a figure of grace and compassion, a woman far too noble to be bothered by such petty backstage drama. But it was too late. The public wasn't buying it. The raw, unfiltered authenticity of the leaked clip had shattered the illusion for good. The comments under the staged charity photos were absolutely brutal. Damage control looking like damage control. Interesting timing for a photo op. You can't rebrand kindness after we all heard you. For years, Meghan had been the undisputed master of controlling her own narrative. She had built an entire post-royal empire on carefully staged appearances, calculated interviews, and a relentless focus on crafting her public image. But now, for the first time, she wasn't controlling the story. She was reacting to it. And in the ruthless, unforgiving game of public perception, the moment you are seen to be reacting, the moment you are on the defensive, you have already lost. The queen of narrative control had lost control of the narrative, and it was spiraling. Fast. Just when the story seemed to be losing momentum. Just as the damage control was starting to gain a sliver of traction. The French fashion publication Times L'Officiel de la Mode Times dropped a nuclear bomb. They published a meticulously researched, deeply sourced piece on the Balenciaga incident. And buried deep in the third paragraph, almost as a quiet aside, was the bombshell revelation that nobody saw coming. They had figured out who leaked the clip. Want to guess? It wasn't a rival. It wasn't a random bystander with a lucky shot. The clip was filmed and deliberately leaked by one of Meghan's own junior aides, a traitor in the palace of Montecito. The publication, respecting journalistic ethics, kept the source anonymous, but they had the receipts. They had copies of encrypted messages between the aide and a well-known fashion blogger, messages sent days, times before times the Balenciaga show even happened, and one text, one single chilling line, stood out. "You'll get what you need tonight." Read that again. Not, "I hope something happens." Not, "Maybe I'll get something." It was a promise. You'll get what you need tonight. This was no spontaneous act of a disgruntled employee. This was a calculated, pre-planned takedown. An assassination from within her own inner circle. The entire narrative instantly shifted from a simple story of a backstage confrontation to a complex, dark conspiracy. Someone on her own payroll, someone she presumably trusted, had set a trap, and Meghan, blinded by her own arrogance, had walked right into it, camera rolling. The question was no longer simply what happened. The question was why. Why would someone risk their entire career to expose her? The answer arrived 3 days later, not in a respected publication, but from the digital shadows. A brand new, completely anonymous TikTok account materialized out of the ether. Its profile was blank. No followers, no history. Just a bio that contained 4 chilling words. Truth. From the inside. Its first and only post was a rapid-fire slideshow of screenshots, text messages. Lots of them. Allegedly from Meghan to her staff, a horrifying, unending litany of petty demands, cruel instructions, and breathtaking arrogance. Fix this lighting before we arrive. Tell them to move me closer to the designers section. I don't care who is there now. Don't let anyone film me from the left side, ever. This coat needs steaming again. I don't care if we're running late. Each screenshot was dated and time-stamped, painting a damning, systematic picture of a relentlessly demanding and cruel boss, someone who treated her team less like human beings and more like props in her own personal production. The slideshow was posted with one simple, devastating caption that provided the motive for the betrayal in 6 words. "This is why I recorded her." The account went viral, amassing millions of views in a matter of hours before vanishing completely, as if it had never existed. 24 hours later, wiped clean. But the damage was done. Because the internet never forgets. The receipts had already been saved, shared, and seared into the public consciousness. You can delete the source, but you can't delete what millions of people have already downloaded. The betrayal was no longer a mystery. It was the inevitable, logical consequence of a pattern of behavior that had finally, spectacularly, reached its breaking point. While Meghan's world in Montecito spiraled into paranoia and a desperate, failing damage control operation, Anna Wintour made her final move, and it was a masterstroke of quiet, corporate brutality. It wasn't a tell-all interview. It wasn't a splashy cover story. It was a single, sterile, almost boring paragraph posted late one Tuesday evening on Vogue Business. That's a key detail. Not the main Vogue website, not Anna's personal accounts, but their industry-facing trade publication, the one read by insiders, designers, and executives. not by the general public. The statement was a masterpiece of lethal understatement. Vogue remains committed to maintaining environments of respect and professionalism. Our collaborators are expected to uphold the same standards. That's it. 31 words. No names mentioned. No specific incident referenced. No dramatic language. Just cold, precise, surgical steel. But for those who knew how to read the code, for the entire industry that speaks this language of quiet power, it was a public execution. The Guardian called it a quiet but unmistakable message. Women's Wear Daily said it was an open rebuke wrapped in elegance. And Vanity Fair? They went straight for the jugular with a headline that made everyone stop scrolling. You can't bully Vogue either. Anna hadn't just won the battle. She had ended the war by issuing a final, unappealable verdict from on high. She had framed Meghan not as a powerful rival, but as a failed collaborator who did not meet the basic, minimum standards of professional conduct. It was a corporate excommunication, delivered with a whisper, not a shout. The final nail in the coffin came from Anna herself, and it was delivered with a chilling, almost bored elegance. A few days later, a bold reporter from the New York Times managed to corner her at a Louis Vuitton dinner. A foolish move, honestly. He asked her directly about Meghan and the whole Paris situation. Anna stopped. She adjusted her ever-present sunglasses, even though it was evening, and offered a faint, fleeting, almost imperceptible smile. I don't discuss distractions, and then she simply walked away. That one word distractions was more devastating, more utterly annihilating, than any public insult could ever have been. Think about the cold, calculated genius of it. She didn't call Meghan a problem. She didn't call her difficult. She didn't even acknowledge her as a worthy opponent. She dismissed her, the entire scandal, her entire carefully constructed brand, as an irrelevant, insignificant footnote, not worthy of a serious person's consideration. In Anna's world, being criticized means you still matter enough to be addressed. Being ignored, being labeled a distraction, that means you have been erased. And so began the quiet erasure of Meghan Markle from the world of high fashion. The locked doors, the unavailable designers, the rescinded invitations, it all solidified from a temporary punishment into a permanent reality. What started with 5 words in a Paris hallway ended in a silent, methodical, and complete removal from the kingdom she had so arrogantly tried to conquer. The institution had won. So what do you think? Was this a calculated takedown orchestrated by a master strategist? Or was it simply the inevitable, spectacular implosion of a brand built on the quicksand of PR and narcissism? Drop your thoughts below, because this forensic case file is far from closed. If this story blew your mind, do me a favor. Smash that like button. Seriously, it helps more than you know. And drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Anna right to call her out publicly? Or should she have handled it differently? Do you think Meghan can ever recover from this in the fashion world? Let me know your take. If you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to subscribe to Spilled Royal Tea and hit the notification bell. We're diving into more celebrity drama, fashion industry secrets, and the stories behind the headlines that you won't find anywhere else. Got someone in mind you want me to cover next? Drop their name in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for watching Spilled Royal Tea. I'll catch you in the next one.